It was supposed to be just another small claims hearing. Judge Eleanor Bates, known for her calm demeanor and no-nonsense rulings, sipped her morning coffee as the bailiff called the next case. Sarah Greer versus Brent Harlow. The judge expected another dull landlord-tenant dispute. What she didn't expect was a golden retriever entering her courtroom. Heads turned as Sarah stepped forward, her hand firmly gripping the leash of a well-groomed, alert dog. The dog walked confidently beside her, tail still, eyes scanning the room. Judge Bates raised an eyebrow, but allowed it. "Ma'am," she asked, peering over her glasses, "is the dog necessary?" "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah replied, her voice calm but strained. "This is Cooper. He's a key part of this case." The judge nodded slowly, intrigued. The courtroom whispered as Sarah and Cooper took their place at the plaintiff's table. Across the room sat Brent Harlow, a man in his late 40s, dressed sharply but with a smug expression. He barely glanced at the dog. Judge Bates looked at the paperwork. Sarah was suing Brent for emotional distress and damages caused by what she claimed was a break-in that happened due to faulty locks in her rented apartment. She also alleged that her dog, Cooper, had been injured and psychologically traumatized. As a result, "Let's begin," the judge said, tapping her pen. "Mr. Harlow, your response?" Brent stood and cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the locks were in working order. The tenant is exaggerating. And quite frankly, I don't see how a dog fits into this claim." But as Brent spoke, something unexpected happened. Cooper stood up, not a simple stretch or shift. He rose stiffly, his ears pointed straight up. He stared directly at Brent, body tense, tail lowered. His eyes didn't blink. A soft growl began in his throat, barely audible at first, but rising with intensity. It was not aggressive, more like a warning. A memory. Judge Bates paused. "Miss Greer, control your dog." Sarah knelt down beside Cooper, whispering something soothing. Cooper stopped growling, but didn't break his gaze. The room grew tense. Brent shuffled, trying to act unaffected, but everyone noticed his sudden unease. "I apologize, Your Honor," Sarah said, gently patting Cooper's head. "He's never reacted to anyone like this before." The judge's curiosity was piqued. She had seen all kinds of theatrics in her years on the bench, but something about the dog's reaction wasn't staged. It felt primal, instinctual, genuine. "Is the dog trained?" the judge asked. "Yes," Sarah replied. "I adopted him from a rescue 2 years ago. He's calm, quiet, and trained for emotional support, but he has ... triggers." "Triggers?" the judge repeated. Sarah nodded. "He came from a bad place. He was abused before I got him. Loud voices, certain scents, sometimes even specific people, he reacts to them." Brent laughed under his breath. The judge silenced him with a glance. "We'll stick to the facts." As Brent continued his defense, denying all responsibility and claiming the break-in never happened, Cooper began growling again, low and persistent. This time, he didn't stop. His hackles rose, and his eyes stayed locked on Brent like he was staring at something beneath the surface. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Miss Greer, does your dog recognize this man?" Sarah's voice shook a little. "I think he might." Now the courtroom was still. No one moved. The judge slowly put down her pen. "Mr. Harlow," she said sharply, "you said you've never met this dog before?" "Never," he replied quickly, but Cooper didn't believe him, and Judge Bates, for the first time in years, began to wonder if this wasn't a small claims case at all. The courtroom settled into an uneasy silence. Judge Bates glanced down at Cooper, still standing rigidly at Sarah's side. His eyes never left Brent Harlow, who now shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The judge couldn't explain it, but the dog's reaction didn't feel like nervousness. It felt like recognition. Something deeper, older, wounded. The judge leaned back in her chair. "We'll proceed?" she said firmly. "Mr. Harlow, please continue your testimony." Brent stood again. "As I said earlier, the locks were inspected and fully functional. There's no proof of a break-in. The claim is baseless, and dragging a dog into this, frankly, it's theatrical." Before he could finish, Cooper let out a sharp bark. One loud bark. It echoed through the courtroom like a gavel. The judge nearly dropped her pen. Brent froze mid-sentence. Sarah tugged gently on the leash, whispering, "It's okay, Cooper. He can't hurt you anymore." But the tension in the room had already cracked wide open. "Bailiff," the judge said, approached the dog slowly. The bailiff, a broad-shouldered man named Quinn, stepped cautiously toward Cooper. The dog didn't react to him. He didn't move, didn't growl. He only watched Brent, tail low and stiff. Judge Bates turned back to Sarah. "What exactly are his triggers?" Sarah took a breath. "Men who smell of tobacco. People who wear heavy boots. Loud male voices, but mostly certain men. He's never responded like this in public, Your Honor. Not even close." The judge glanced again at Cooper, then at Brent's. Polished leather boots and the faint scent of cologne and smoke that lingered when he passed the bench. "Interesting," she muttered. Sarah's attorney, a young man named Parker Wynn, stood up. "Your Honor, if I may, Cooper has been through trauma, yes, but he's also demonstrated remarkable memory and sensory recognition. What we're seeing here may not be coincidence. We believe Mr. Harlow isn't just a negligent landlord. We believe he may have a deeper connection to Cooper's past." Brent scoffed loudly. "Are you accusing me of something?" Judge Bates silenced him with a glare. "You'll speak when spoken to." Sarah reached into her folder and handed a veterinary report to Parker, who gave it to the judge. "This is from Cooper's initial intake when I adopted him," she said. "He had healed fractures, deep ligature scars around his legs, and signs of long-term confinement. The vet said it looked like he'd been tied or chained. We were told he was rescued from a site in Indiana." Brent looked increasingly pale. "I want to remind the court," Sarah continued, "I didn't bring Cooper here for sympathy. He's not a prop, but something in him, something instinctual, is reacting to this man. And I think it's because he remembers him." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge tapped her gavel. Silence. Bates read through the vet report, her brows furrowed. She turned to her clerk. "During recess, I want a full background check on Mr. Harlow. Sealed records, out-of-state files, everything." "Yes, Your Honor," the clerk replied. Brent's attorney objected. "This is beyond the scope of a civil hearing." The judge didn't blink. This may no longer be just a civil hearing. Everyone was stunned. Cooper, finally, sat down his body. Still alert, his eyes never leaving Brent. Judge Bates scribbled a note on her pad, then looked up. "We will recess for 20 minutes. When we return, I expect answers." Sarah leaned down and hugged Cooper. "You're so brave," she whispered. "Just hold on." But Cooper wasn't just holding on. He was remembering, and what he remembered might finally bring the truth to light. When Judge Bates returned to the courtroom, her expression had shifted. It wasn't her usual firm calm. There was something sharper in her eyes, concern, perhaps, or suspicion. She looked directly at Brent Harlow. "Mr. Harlow," she said, "are you aware of a 2011 case filed against you in Wayne County, Michigan?" Brent blinked, then shook his head. "No, Your Honor. I've never been in trouble with the law." The judge turned to her clerk, who stood holding a thin manila folder. "According to sealed juvenile court records," the clerk read, "Brent Harlow was detained in connection with suspected animal cruelty and illegal dogfighting. Charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence." The courtroom gasped. Even the bailiff shifted on his feet. Brent turned red, then pale. "That case was expunged," he stammered. "It was a misunderstanding. I never—" Judge Bates cut him off. "I didn't ask for a justification. I asked if you were aware. Clearly, you were." Sarah sat frozen, one hand resting gently on Cooper's back. The golden retriever hadn't moved, his gaze still locked on the man across the room. But now, it was as if the past had a name. Brent Harlow wasn't just a neglectful landlord. He was the nightmare Cooper had escaped from. Parker Wynne stood up slowly. "Your Honor, we believe that Cooper, then an unnamed golden retriever, was one of the dogs rescued during a raid near Fort Wayne, Indiana. While no arrests were made, the shelter director kept meticulous notes. The dates match Brent Harlow's residence in the area. So do the photos." He passed a file to the judge. Inside were grainy photographs of malnourished dogs in small cages. One stood out, a young golden retriever with wide, terrified eyes. A vet had circled the scars around the animal's front legs. "Severe restraint marks," the caption read. "Possible electric collar burns." Judge Bates's hands tightened. Slightly on the folder dot, Sarah spoke up softly. "When I adopted Cooper, he wouldn't enter dark rooms. He screamed at the sound of a metal door closing. And for weeks, he didn't bark, he just whimpered. I didn't know what had happened to him until now." The entire courtroom was silent. Even Brent's attorney sat down, no longer willing to speak. Judge Bates stared down at Brent. "Did you ever own dogs in Indiana?" Brent hesitated. "I helped someone train hunting dogs. That's all. I never hurt any animals." Cooper stood again, tail stiff, growling not loudly, but deliberately. The judge tapped her pen. "Mr. Wynne, can you connect this man to the property where these dogs were found?" "We believe so," he said. "Brent's name doesn't appear on the lease, but utility bills from the time list his email and contact number. We'd like to request a court order to search the premises for confirmation." Judge Bates didn't hesitate. "Granted." Brent shouted, "This is insane. This is a civil case. You can't just drag up the past. You dragged the past into this room the moment you stepped into it," Judge Bates snapped. "And this dog remembered what the system forgot." She turned to Sarah. "Thank you for bringing Cooper today. He may have just opened the door to justice for a lot more than a broken lock." Sarah held Cooper close. For the first time, she felt her instincts were truly understood. Outside, reporters began to gather. Inside, Cooper, the silent witness, sat still and strong. What he remembered could now bring down the man who once tried to silence him. *2. Days later, the courtroom buzzed with quiet tension. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the hallway outside was packed with reporters and animal rights activists. The search warrant Judge Bates issued had unearthed something disturbing, and everyone knew the case had grown far beyond a landlord-tenant dispute. Brent Harlow sat at the defense table, noticeably shaken. His confidence had disappeared. Sarah entered with Cooper, walking beside her, calm but alert. The moment Cooper saw Brent, his tail lowered and his head dropped slightly, not out of fear, but recognition. Judge Bates entered, looked around, and got straight to the point. "We now have reason to believe the plaintiff's dog, Cooper, was a victim of prior abuse connected to the defendant's past activities. Mr. Wynne, please present your findings." Parker Wynne stood with a USB drive in hand. "Your Honor, what we're about to play is a voice recording taken from an old police interview with Mr. Harlow during the 2011 Michigan investigation. At the time, Brent was questioned about operating an illegal kennel in coordination with other individuals. We believe Cooper was one of the animals held on that property." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom grew silent as the clip began to play. At first, there were just low voices. Ben Brent's voice came through calm, dismissive, denying all involvement. The recording lasted barely 30 seconds, but the effect was instant. Cooper began to tremble, not violently, not dramatically, but visibly. He took a step backward, ears pinned, and let out a soft, high-pitched whine. Sarah knelt beside him, whispering comfort, but Cooper wouldn't take his eyes off the speakers. When the voice repeated, he growled a sound full of pain, not anger. The judge watched carefully, visibly moved. Then the second test began. This time, Parker played a neutral male voice. Cooper remained still, showing no response. Then he played another clip. Brent again, from a separate interview years later. Cooper immediately barked once, low and deliberate. Enough, the judge said quietly. The room remained silent. Wynne continued, Your Honor, this dog isn't just traumatized. He remembers. Dogs have remarkable scent and sound memory. In this case, Cooper's reaction is consistent, specific, and telling. He doesn't react to all men, he reacts to Brent. Judge Bates turned to Brent, who refused to make eye contact. His lawyer stood, clearly panicked. This is circumstantial. It's emotionally manipulative. A dog can't testify in court. No, the judge said firmly, but evidence can. She turned to the clerk. What was found at the Indiana property? The clerk stood. Officers discovered a hidden sub-basement. Inside were 3 rusted kennels, chain fragments, bite-marked walls, and skeletal remains of at least 2 dogs. The vet report confirms signs of prolonged restraint, malnutrition, and suspected blunt trauma. Sarah closed her eyes. Cooper leaned into her leg gently. Judge Bates looked straight at Brent. You told this court you had nothing to do with that house. Yet your name is tied to the power bills, the water account, even a veterinary supply invoice shipped directly to the residence. You lied under oath. Brent didn't speak. You're facing perjury charges, she added coldly. And depending on what's uncovered in the forensic analysis, this may escalate to criminal animal cruelty charges. Cooper looked at Brent once more, and then he sat down, calm, quiet, like he knew the hardest part was over. The judge turned to Sarah. Miss Greer, I commend you for your courage, and your dogs. Sarah's voice cracked. He's more than just a pet. He's a survivor. I always knew he came from something terrible. I just never imagined I'd be looking him in the eyes across a courtroom. Judge Bates gave a rare, respectful nod. Neither did I. The truth had finally started to speak through scars, memory, and a dog who refused to be silent. The next morning, 3 investigators arrived at the old Indiana property tied to Brent Harlow. The building had sat empty for years, surrounded by overgrown weeds and broken fencing. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than a forgotten house, but inside, it told a much darker story. In the back hallway, beneath a worn rug and a warped wooden hatch, officers discovered a concealed trapdoor. The hinges were rusted shut, but with enough effort, they forced it open. A bitter smell of mold, rot, and old blood rushed up like a wave. Flashlights pierced the darkness below. The basement was barely tall enough to stand in. Chains hung from concrete pillars. 3 decaying metal cages were lined up along the wall, their doors twisted, the floors layered with old bones, fur, and stained straw. Deep scratch marks scarred the brick walls. Nearby, they found a pile of bloodied cloths, collars, and a broken metal pole with dried hair stuck to one end. Veterinarian Dr. Colleen Marsh, who accompanied the team, knelt beside the remains. These were fighting dogs, she whispered. You can see it in the bones, the fractures, the tooth damage, the rib displacement. They were starved, brutalized, and caged. This wasn't just neglect. It was a system of torture. Photos were taken. Samples were collected. And in a small metal box hidden in the ceiling insulation, they found something even more damning, a set of handwritten notes, listing feeding times, breeding instructions, and a list of dogs by color and scar location. One entry stood out: Golden. Front leg scar, lines nonstop, put him near the back. Back in the courtroom, Sarah sat holding Cooper's leash tightly, unaware of what had been discovered. But Cooper seemed to sense something. He was calm, settled. He didn't growl when Brent entered that day. He just stared, long and hard, as if waiting. Judge Bates began the session with no delay. "The evidence from the property has confirmed our worst fears," she said, her voice heavy. This was not an abandoned space. It was an active site for illegal dogfighting. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She gripped Cooper's collar gently. "We have photographs, forensic vet analysis, and material connecting Mr. Harlow to that house," the judge continued. "We also have the names of several dogs logged in handwritten records, including what we believe is a direct reference to the plaintiff's dog, Cooper." She held up a scanned copy of the note. Brent shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Harlow," the judge said, her tone sharp, "you are now under criminal investigation. This court will hand over all evidence to the district attorney. For now, you are being held in contempt for lying under oath." A deputy moved to Brent's side. "I didn't write those notes," Brent said quickly, desperate. "It was someone else's operation. I just helped out. I didn't hurt them, I didn't." But no one believed him. Judge Bates nodded toward the bailiff. "Remove him from the courtroom." As Brent was escorted out, Cooper stood, not barking, not growling, just standing like a soldier watching an enemy fall. Sarah wept quietly, her hand against Cooper's fur. "You did it," she whispered. "You remembered." The judge looked at the dog and smiled faintly. "Some witnesses speak with words," she said softly, "and others with memory." In that moment, Cooper became more than just a rescue dog. He was the reason justice had a second chance. The courtroom didn't just see a pet anymore. They saw a hero, wrapped in fur, scars, and silence. Asterisked by the next morning, the story had Gone National.News anchors across the country opened with the headline, "Rescue Dog Identifies Abuser in Courtroom. Hidden Dogfighting Ring Exposed." Videos of Sarah walking Cooper out of the courthouse were replayed again and again. In the footage, Cooper walked tall and calm, never pulling on his leash, never barking, just quietly watching, like he understood what had happened. Animal rights organizations flooded social media with tributes. #JusticeForCooper trended worldwide. Donations poured into shelters across the Midwest. Rescue groups cited Cooper's story as proof that trauma didn't define a dog's worth. It revealed their strength. Judge Bates, usually a private and reserved figure, gave a brief press statement. "I've presided over thousands of cases in my career," she said. But this reminded all of us that justice doesn't always come from a voice. Sometimes it comes from memory, from silence, from survival. Brent Harlow was officially charged with multiple counts of felony: animal cruelty, obstruction of justice, perjury, and possession of illegal paraphernalia linked to animal fighting. The DA's office announced they were reopening several cold cases connected to illegal kennels in the region, now with renewed interest and new leads. Cooper had become a catalyst. Inside Sarah's home, life had shifted. She received hundreds of letters, some from families of adopted dogs, others from survivors of abuse who saw themselves in Cooper's quiet strength. Cooper remained unchanged, still gentle, still watchful, but something in him had settled. He no longer startled at distant shouting. He didn't avoid the basement anymore. He even began playing with other dogs at the park. He knows it's over, Sarah told a local journalist. He carried that fear for so long. And now, I think he knows he's safe. A week later, Sarah received an invitation. The National Animal Welfare Alliance wanted to present Cooper with the Medal of Courage, an award given only to animals whose actions led to justice or saved lives. Sarah was stunned. I never imagined any of this when I adopted him, she said. He was just broken, shaking, quiet. I thought I'd be saving him. But he's the one who did the saving. The ceremony was held at a private garden event in Washington, D.C., where lawmakers, judges, and shelter leaders gathered. When Cooper walked onto the stage wearing a small bodie, the crowd stood and clapped, some wiping away tears. The announcer shared his story, from the rescue shelter to the courtroom, to the discovery of the hidden basement. As the medal was placed gently around his neck, Cooper didn't react like a human might. He didn't bark or wag with excitement. Instead, he turned and rested his head gently on Sarah's leg. She knelt and hugged him tight. Judge Bates was also present. She walked over, knelt down beside Cooper, and scratched behind his ears. You reminded the justice system what it means to listen, she whispered. Later that night, Sarah stood in front of the cameras one last time. I want people to understand something, she said. Cooper's not a miracle. He's not magic. He's proof that when we pay attention, when we believe, survivors change happens. Back home, the courthouse had placed a small plaque in the courtroom hallway. In honor of Cooper, the witness with no words, who spoke louder than any man. The applause at the ceremony had long faded, but the ripple effect of Cooper's story was still unfolding across the country. Animal shelters reported a spike in adoptions. Donations to cruelty prevention programs surged. Even lawmakers began proposing stricter penalties for dogfighting and abuse, citing the Cooper case as a turning point in how survivors, animal or human, are treated in courtrooms. Cooper had done more than help convict a criminal. He had reignited a national conversation. Meanwhile, back in Ohio, Judge Bates ordered a comprehensive review of all cruelty-related cases in her jurisdiction. We missed too much, she told her clerks. That ends now. She began encouraging expert testimony from animal behaviorists, something previously unheard of in small claims courts. Sarah, now unexpectedly in the spotlight, received a letter from a prison inmate who had once run an illegal kennel and turned himself in after reading about Cooper. I couldn't stop thinking about that dog, the letter read. The way he looked at that man, that could have been me. Maybe it was me to someone else. The media hailed Cooper as the dog who made America listen. But despite the praise, Sarah tried to protect Cooper from the chaos. She limited appearances, turned down interviews, and returned to her quiet routines. Cooper's well-being came first. Still, she agreed to one final public moment at a candlelight vigil held outside the Franklin County Courthouse, where it all began. Hundreds gathered with candles, photos of adopted dogs, and signs reading, "He barked for the silenced," and "Cooper, our voice." Judge Bates attended, standing beside Sarah and Cooper on the courthouse steps. A soft breeze drifted through the crowd as the judge addressed them. This dog, she said, gesturing to Cooper, did not need to speak to be heard. He remembered something we chose to forget. That justice must never overlook the silent. That healing, no matter how broken, is possible. She knelt beside Cooper and gently touched his medal. Thank you, she whispered. The crowd erupted in soft clapping, many in tears. Some knelt to greet Cooper, who calmly sat, letting strangers stroke his golden fur. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He seemed to understand that these weren't the people who had hurt him. These were the ones who had finally heard him. The next day, The Franklin County Commissioners announced that a local animal rehabilitation and therapy center would be built and named after Cooper. The Cooper Center for Animal Recovery and Justice would provide care for abused dogs and offer education to stop cruelty. Before it began, Sarah was overwhelmed when she was asked to serve on the advisory board. "I don't know anything about building a center." She laughed through tears. "You know everything about saving a dog," the director replied. "And that's more than enough." That night, back at home, Sarah sat by the fireplace as Cooper curled up beside her. The house was warm, peaceful, and quiet. Sarah reached down, ran her fingers through his fur, and whispered, "You changed the world, you know." Cooper didn't respond with a bark or movement. He just sighed softly, tail thumping once against the floor. In his own way, he understood. He had gone from a nameless, broken soul chained in a dark basement to a symbol of survival, courage, and truth. Not by barking the loudest, but by simply refusing to forget. Months after the trial and the national attention, Sarah and Cooper finally moved away from the noise and scrutiny of the city. They settled in a quiet cabin tucked deep in the green hills of Vermont. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and earth. It was a far cry from the cramped apartment and courtroom drama that had defined the last year of their lives. For Cooper, this was more than a new home. It was a chance to heal. At first, he was cautious. The shadows still unnerved him. Sudden noises made his ears twitch. But each day, with Sarah's gentle encouragement, he grew more comfortable. He ran through open fields, chased butterflies, and even rolled on the soft grass, something he hadn't done since before the abuse. Sarah watched him with a mix of relief and gratitude. "You're finally free," she whispered one afternoon, sitting beside him on a wooden bench overlooking the valley. Cooper's amber eyes met hers, calm and trusting. Judge Bates had stayed in touch. She sent photos of her own rescue dog, a shy Labrador mix named Maggie. "Inspired by you and Cooper," she'd written. The courthouse plaque still hung in the hall, a quiet tribute to the dog who had changed everything. But Cooper didn't care about honors or headlines. He cared about the slow return of peace. Sarah thought about the long journey they'd traveled, from the dark basement filled with cages and cruelty, to the hushed courtroom where a dog's silent witness sparked justice. Cooper's scars remained, both physical and emotional, but they no longer defined him. They were reminders of strength, not suffering. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah and Cooper sat by the fireplace. The flickering flames cast warm shadows on the walls. Cooper rested his head on Sarah's lap, eyes half closed. "I know you'll never forget," Sarah said softly. "But maybe now you can live without fear." He gave a soft sigh in response. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Gentle reminder that life moves on. That healing is possible, even after the darkest of nights. Back in the courthouse, Judge Bates reflected on the case that had shaken her world. "Sometimes," she told a reporter, "justice isn't about what's spoken aloud. It's about what's remembered. It's about listening not just to words, but to the silences in between." Cooper had been more than a dog in that courtroom. He was a witness, a survivor, a hero. And though he never spoke a word, his story was heard loud and clear. It was a story about courage, about hope, about the power of never giving up. And most of all, about peace at last.